James Kerr, I am just thrilled to have you on to talk about this marvelous book, Legacy. I mean, just the name Legacy is already brilliant because it's such a challenge for most of us to figure out what is our own legacy, much less the legacy of a company or the legacy of a team. Um, James, how would you like to describe yourself? Who is James Kerr?
The existential question. I'm a writer. I am a coach. I am a sometimes speaker, and I am a consultant. And I work around the nexus really of culture, leadership, and mindset, and high performance. Um, Really, how do we create a space around ourselves in which we can most consistently perform to our best, whatever our definition of best might be?
The high performance notion.
Sorry, say again. Sorry.
The high performance notion.
Yeah, well, the zone of high performance, because I think, high performance, traditionally is, elite, exceptional, win. But of course, high performance is many different things for many different people. And it can be to thrive, in our living and in our life. It can be to create. So it's sort of why I put whatever the caveat, whatever that might mean for you, because I think it can be too easily niched into the win at all costs, the hundredths, the margins. Now that's an important aspect for many, but there are many different definitions of what high performance means, and I think defining that is part of the work. The know thyself part is part of the work.
Sort of like defining success.
Well, yeah, defining life itself, maybe. What is this thing? And I think there's an old kind of cliche. Don't search for the meaning of life. Search for a life of meaning. And I think often it begins, I think, often with about deciding what is meaningful for me, for one, for you, for us, and that. Often I think this is a dialogue, the creation of that meaning or the definition of that meaning. I think it begins as a conversation, begins as a dialogue, an appreciative inquiry. I'm not sure you're familiar with that as a process,
Sure,
but in the idea of appreciative inquiry, the questions are generative. The conversation that we have is in fact creative. It creates the future. The Australian Aboriginals have a lovely phrase Bruce Chatwin used in his book, The Songlines, that on Walkabout they sing the world into existence. And I think very much we sing our worlds into existence. A phrase I like to use is the story we tell ourselves becomes the story that others end up telling about us. Our narrative precedes things. We become the map of the territory we create, and in many ways there is a sort of a reflexivity between that. And so the having of the conversation around culture, around meaning, around mindset is what develops it. It is the generative force in a way. And so I like to be the catalyst, I guess, for those conversations and go places to help people. What I talk about, sort of define, design, and deliver. Define who we are, what we stand for, where we're going, why it matters. Then design, well, how do we capture that somehow? How do we create an environment, the standards and expectations, the rituals, the symbols, the reinforcements? And then how do we deliver? Who do we have to be in order to become that thing that we want to become? Starts to become, I think, a big question. And if you look at leadership as not just leading a business or leading an organization, but really about leading a life, then I think they're really important questions. One of the joys for me of the work that I've done is that I wrote Legacy, the book you kindly shared at the beginning, thinking that it was really going to be for sports coaches and some business leaders. And one of the joys is that it is been hugely embraced, for instance, within the educational community, within the idea that how do you coach for character? How do you set emerging individuals, humans, up for as you say, a successful life? Well, that begins with that sort of process of self-definition, I think, of deciding what success looks like, and what is meaningful, and why what we do matters. And they're kind of big questions, but they are very powerful questions, I think, in terms of being able to choose the right path, I think. And for me, that's hugely fulfilling, is to make a contribution to people in that conversation.
Well, now you understand my first question, James. Who are you?
Who
Because isn't that the quest?
yeah.
You said a lot of different things. And just starting with this notion of finding yourself, that quest. My observation has been that you said it starts with a dialogue or a conversation. I want to get back to that in a moment, but it feels like you need to do stuff first before being able to engage in the conversation or trying to find out who you are, because you haven't tested yourself. Otherwise, it's highly abstract. And oftentimes it seems like it's either because you've had a near-death experience or you've crossed 50 years old that this topic becomes so pregnantly poignant.
Mm, mm. I think absolutely. In fact, I think if you take Erickson, the psychologist, he believes that it's 40 years old, and that we go through different life stages, and he really coined the idea of life stages, and a midlife crisis was one of his. And that idea that, and it's almost the sort of seven ages of man from Shakespeare. We start off as mewling, puking babies, but we kind of become the sort of the thrusting warrior. We just go out and express our whatever talents seem to be emerging in let's say in our teens and in our 20s. And then in our 30s, maybe we consolidate it a little bit. And maybe around the time of our 40s, perhaps. For some earlier, for some later, for some never, we maybe start to think about, well, what's this all about? We've been so busy proving ourselves or surviving, perhaps, and finding a life, that we get to a point where we're going, okay, well, what is really significant about what I'm doing? And you mentioned a near-death experience, the same. I think there are a lot of very self-actualized people who have had to deal with early loss and trauma, because it forces you to go, well, I'm a mortal being, I'm a fragile frond, clinging on to a disappearing planet, and so those questions, I think, become more profound, obviously, as you get older. But I also think, particularly with a team or an organization, they're very good questions to ask about, because the flip side of that, those questions about what does it all mean and what my legacy is really about impact. What's my work here? So it's very purposeful. And I think if you can find purpose in your pursuits, whether that's professional or purposeful or creative, then it's a very powerful way to stand. I mean, a phrase I use in the book is, higher purpose delivers higher performance. The more you've got to play for, the more you do. If we do extraordinary things, and on one level that comes down, without sounding kind of too wishy-washy, it kind of comes down to love. How do we love what we do and choose what we do? Because love is about contribution. It's about being present. So there's a huge number of strains and strands, I think, in that legacy question, if you like. But certainly there is a point in life that you would be an unusual person if you didn't look around and go, well, what are they going to say about me? What's my eulogy going to be? And what am I? Will I make my kids proud? All of those questions, I think, are very fundamental to the human experience. And by embracing them and acknowledging them, I think we get to a deeper place in our own self-understanding and a more powerful place in being able to, in inverted commas, perform, if you like. So that's the way I see it.
I love it. I want to get back to some of those things, but this type of conversation, this type of topic in the boardroom or in business, in my experience, is entirely missing. I've never been on a board where or in a executive committee meeting where we've talked about ethics or a bigger purpose or what does our brand really mean. It's generally, how are we doing for the month? What's our strategy for this year? How can we attract some new clients? What's the new innovation pipeline? Which are all, totally reasonable questions. But this notion, so going back to something you said originally, which is, how do you get that conversation going in a business environment? What does it take? Does it take an external James Kerr to stir the shit and say, hey guys, let's talk some proper stuff? Or should it not be part of the not the daily, but regular discussions amongst people? Because it's about the personal elements at the end of the day.
Well, I probably have a slightly different experience of business because I am that external guy that gets called in to have these conversations. So I see a lot of it all the time. And I think there's a huge appetite for it, both on a personal leadership, in the personal leadership zone, if you like. But also I think increasingly, let's call it in the brand area, or the identity area, the who are we? And there's increased kind of recognition, I think, of its importance. We have emerging generations who come up who are much, much more purpose-led, have more kind of discretionary or more choice over who they align themselves with, who will call out brands and organizations that don't cut it ethically. And ethics can become an existential crisis for an organization or a government or a policing institution. So these questions are big, really. And yeah, I think it's very usual that the urgent is more important than the important. Next month's figures or whatever it is. And that self-interest seems more important than some collective contribution and all of that. But not always, but often that the short-termism of that can lead to some real issues around and organizationally. And, really, if you look at many of the world's great brands, let's talk on a brand level, you talk about the Apples of this world, for instance, Steve Jobs was very purpose-driven. He was putting a dent in the universe. It was making it great. It was no expense spared in terms of the design and the sense that this needs to be something that is sort of ergonomic in the sense that it fits in the human zone. It can be and often is a very, very powerful, force for good. It attracts and retains talent. It creates genuine human value, which creates financial value. I think financial value comes from values, really. The generation of values. So I think they are important questions, and I think often, however, they do get kind of relegated from the boardroom to the marketing suite, or with a little bit in the kind of the HR department, and it sort of gets distributed around. But I think organizations that set out to do good tend to do well, because and so having those conversations at the highest levels, I think have become increasingly important, and I think always were. The other aspect I think about it is, what's interesting is if the closer organizations, I work with some military units, and the closer that you get to the tip of the spear, if you like, the more they do talk about ethics, the more they do embrace the idea of purpose and an ethos of real common cause, if you like. They do it not because it's nice to have, they do it because it stops them getting killed. You know, it's important. It also comes with a lot of ancillary benefits, you know, deep human connection, preparedness to sacrifice for the cause, you know, to stay up late and order pizza in a business team level. So I think those principles are transferable. They in the larger, more matrix corporations where, you know, they're not the most ideal configuration of human effort necessarily. Within the teams within those groups, you see a lot of these principles appear. I think, you know, a desire for connection, a desire for common cause, a kind of an unusual, you know, an uncommon but common language. And all of the needs that people have within a small team environment, psychological safety, that my voice gets heard, I'm seen, I'm recognized, I'm valued, I'm taken care of if things kind of go wrong. I have autonomy in my area. I have self-efficacy. All of these are really the fundamentals of a great culture, and of which purpose is a part. You know, no one likes to watch their life just waste away. You know, the reason people leave jobs, perfectly good jobs, is they're going nowhere.
Or they have
You
a shitty
know,
boss.
well, often they have a shitty, usually it's the same thing, it's part of the same thing. Have a shitty boss, the circumstances aren't right for them, but fundamentally their life is going nowhere. Am I going to put up with a shitty boss for much longer? So meaning matters, if you like, purpose matters. And so I think it's kind of the opportunity and the obligation of leaders at every level to create an environment that is in which people thrive, in which people are able to bring their best and be their best. And purpose, values, purpose, meaning, ethics, ethos, it's all part of that same bundle, I think. And I think ignoring it is naive in the end, I think.
Well, I mean, that's why we're on the call together. I mean, I fundamentally agree with you. And I want to pull in a couple of things, which talked about the military. So I did a documentary film and a book on the Second World War. So I got a chance to talk to lots of people in the military, and the notion of band of brothers. I played 18 years of rugby, and it's a non-violent, or at least, you know, non-mortal type of sport, generally speaking. But it does create a phenomenon of band of brothers because of the hardships and sacrifices you must do for the common good of the team. Yet you talk about meaning, or as John Vervaeke talks about, mattering. There's a widespread discussion about crisis of meaning or lack thereof. And I think in business, it's become very crass. It's really more about survival and finance and shareholder profit than this notion of meaning. And maybe that's because the pendulum or the regard about meaning has become bigger. So you need to do more to accommodate it. But in general, I find there's a lack of energy, this is disengagement, and broadly speaking, a misunderstanding of what purpose is, and a misalignment between my own personal purpose, with that corporate purpose.
But I mean, I think those words, lack of energy, disengagement, you know, and a lack of understanding, you know, that is the consequence of not making a strategic imperative, I think. You know, there was a book written, you know, bullshit jobs. You know, the idea that actually my job is just doing nothing. You know, really, I'm just a cog in the machine. And now, you know, I guess the cynic might call those circumstances kind of a rounding error in the human factor. You know, it's just going to be the consequence of these big corporate machines. And anyway, I'm here for a short time, not a good time. I'm going to rotate and rotate out and make my wedge and get out of there. Well, you know, whatever. But my experience is that there are a lot of and I think we can be, when we say business, this is a very broad church here. There are certainly some, let's call them cynical environments that are quite exploitative, that are very transactional, that are and that will structurally will maybe keep on going. Will they survive and will they thrive in the next 100 years? I would say probably not. And then you've got the more, let's call them enlightened things. So, for instance, I'm working with an investor in the US on a consultancy basis, who had a sort of Damascene moment on the road and went, actually, I want to make purposeful investments. I want to go into a space that I'm investing in organizations that make a difference for the future of the world. Now, boom, there's been a huge success out of that because, of course, they are investments that have real human value. If you're selling sugar water and you're just counting units, well, those kind of companies spend a lot of money on advertising trying to make that work meaningful. If you're doing meaningful work, maybe you don't have to spend so much on the other stuff, and on HR initiatives to kind of keep people happy. So I think it becomes a question of leadership, and I think that it becomes a question of, again, without it being cynical, that these kind of conversations about purpose and meaning and what we're doing and impact are almost a leadership lever. Without that sounding cynical, it's part of the armory or the quiver, very militaristic terms, but part of the quiver of great leadership. Great leaders are great storytellers. First and foremost, I think that the best leaders are great storytellers. I have a dream. Those stories resonate, and they resonate throughout history, putting a dent in the universe. Jobs, one of his, he who has the best story wins. And why? Because people buy into it, they engage, they feel a sense of ownership, they feel emotional equity in that narrative, let's say, and narrative and ethos and ethic are related. And so sure, there's going to be massive pockets or oceans of corporate despair and despondency and lack of imagination. But, great leaders are great storytellers. And part of this is about, capturing hearts, and, if you take storytelling, ethos, logos, and pathos, ethos, credibility, logos, it makes sense, makes good business sense. Pathos, it moves me. It moves me. And you want to have environments that move people. Whether you're running a family, or whether you're running a small team, or whether you're running the world, or an organization, or running the world, what's the narrative, what's the story, and why does it matter? We're coming up to election time in the UK. It's two narratives, maybe three, but two. US is divided between two very, very different narratives. These stories matter. The purpose matters. It's all part of the same bundle. I think it can be very naive to think it's the soft stuff. The soft stuff is the hard stuff. The soft stuff is the hard stuff because it's hard. It's difficult to do. And it's the hard stuff because it delivers hard results in the end. When you galvanize a group, when their heart and soul is into an enterprise, that's an unstoppable force. It doesn't matter the circumstances they come up, they'll figure out the answer, and will prevail in some ways. So it's very easy to go purpose. What does that matter? We're just here for next year, for next month's results. But guaranteed, the people saying that, they've got their own narrative that drives and moves them, and probably moves their immediate team. So it's very easy, I think, to be cynical. It's much, much more difficult and much, much more skilled to understand the nuance of the sort of the human heart, if you like, and the importance of that. And there are terms for a cognitive congruence, all minds pointing in the same direction. How do you achieve that? Well, why is that important? First, it's important because in sport, we talk about marginal gains. Don't try to do one thing 100% better. Try to do 100 things 1% better. Right? If you've got a whole organization who are pointing in the same direction, you've got much less wasted effort. Your enemy is outside, if you like. Your aim is outside. You're not ripping each other apart internally. You're on the same team for the right reasons. You pass the dinner party test. You're proud of what you're doing. Other people might sign up. You are literally creating value, and I sincerely believe that the more you create value on the inside, the more value is accrued from the outside. That business for good is sort of a force for good, but it's a force for good business as well.
Yeah, the notion of values create value, I thoroughly subscribe to. The notion of doing good, though, is a little bit more complicated, and probably is part of the problem, because in this complexity of this messy human stuff, soft, I call essential skills, this is where many of these leaders probably say, well, I don't need that stuff. Look at me, I'm successful already. I have 3 houses, and I don't need to tamper with this sort of trendy purpose thing. And plus, I'm really not good at it. This idea of empathy. I don't have the time to listen to people who wax on or moan on about something or other. I just do your business. I'm paying you enough. Just do what I tell you to do. And it's not, there's, stories, good Lord, that takes time. That actually means possibly being vulnerable.
Yep. The comments of cowards, the product of fear, I would say that's largely psychologically, the inability to grow and to learn and develop. I would challenge that in a leader that came up with that kind of line. Listen, business is full of psychopaths. There's a joke somebody said, there are so many of them. They're either in prison or they're in your office. There's plenty around. There are plenty of people who have achieved great things because they have a lack of empathy. Absolutely. But we're not all wired like that. We're not all wired like that. And the interesting thing, you talk about, another word there was sort of trendy. I don't think this is trendy at all. I think this is eternal.
This is fundamental.
This is Marcus Aurelius. This is Martin Luther King. This is JFK. This is Julius Caesar. Seizing the public's imagination.
And the worst of it is, James, that actually it's successful. It
and it's well, it is. There's a sort of I'm successful anyway. I don't need to do this. Well, are you fully as successful as you might be? No, if I can swear, this shit works.
Exactly.
It works. It changes heart. It captures hearts and it changes minds. And it inspires. It captures the spirit. You talked about Band of Brothers. The idea of esprit de corps. The French side of you, the esprit de corps, right? It's the spirit of the group, or the spirit of the body. There is a small spiritual element to motivation and to leadership. We are capturing the souls of human beings without being kind of an old hippie standing on the Glastonbury tour screaming at the heavens. It is part of, and we know that. We are inspired and uplifted as human beings, and it is an essential part of what motivates us, of what gets us out of bed in the morning, of what means that we go that extra mile for other people. All of those aspects, I think, are massively important, and if you get it right, differentiating and success making, so to your notional cynic going, I've been really successful and I've got 3 houses. Well, maybe you could have 6 if that's what turns you on, you know?
Hopefully he'll start walking soon. But you mentioned another thing which resonated with another conversation I had with a very successful squash coach who in fact coached the Trinity College squash team in the United States and had a 252 match winning streak and 13
Wow.
national championships in a row. And one of his lessons learned over his career was less to look for the skill, there had to be the skill, but he wanted to have large character, had,
Yeah.
and to recruit for character. And I was like, good Lord, you mentioned earlier this idea of coaching for character and in
Mhm.
education. I think rugby is a sport that I think promotes this idea. But in general, it seems like the trend that I was using just now is the reverse. It's to
Mhm.
sanitize, it's to remove hardship, it's to remove pain, which is
Mhm.
the elemental bonding experience, incorporated bonding experience, which helps you to have that esprit de corps, because in the corps is the
Mm.
body, and
It was the
the
body.
I, yeah, and having it in you and the rituals, and when you do gestures that are ritualized, these are
Mm.
formalized gestures. You even when you're talking by yourself on the street on the phone, your other hand will be waxing on and complimenting what you're saying because that's how we talk.
Yes.
And these
Yeah.
gestures absolutely reinforce our style of communication, our energy, our abilities to convince and in a storytelling mode. But we feel like it's sort of becoming cardboard versions, and in education get rid of anything that's risky.
Mm.
And therefore, how do you build character without risk?
Well, I think that, if we scroll back a little bit, the first thing is to your squash coach, there's capability in this character, and I think it was John Wooden, and I think Michael Jordan said something very similar, that that talent will win you a game or two, but character will win tournaments.
Mhm.
Bill Walsh, the coach of the San Francisco 49ers, talked about success as being cumulative character. It's those small character decisions, the small sacrifices, the small disciplines that accumulated leads to something. Of course, ethos means character. Ethos means character. It's
Which you have in the book.
character and the characteristic of an organization. So, and I think just to sort of break down, some of those things, I think certainly we're at the time where we sort of snowplow for our kids and we try to smooth out, we try to smooth it out, and but we only learn in the zone of discomfort, is the truth. It's like going to the gym. You've got to kind of break down muscle tissue before it'll build. And that is one of the ways that we build character. Absolutely. And we talked about military examples, Hell Week and the Navy SEALs. It's not about how well you swim. It's about, will you keep swimming? But one of the real reasons for Hell Week or selection and special forces or whatever is also, of course, is it creates incredibly strong bonds, that band of brothers, because shared adversity creates collective character, and we know that when we've been through hard times, sickness in the family or setbacks or whatever, those are the moments that make us or break us, and normally they make us. The kind of kintsugi thing, smash a piece of pottery, make it more beautiful with the gold. It's the fixing that makes it strong. And so but I think, coming back to a question, if you apply this as a leader, what is character, and what does that, how do you select for character? And that's not an easy thing, right? But I think you need to start thinking in terms of sort of values and standards in a way. A rugby coach, he called it the telltales. You know, do they leave their coffee after an interview? Do they leave their coffee on the table for you to pick up, or do they do something with it? You know, do they, do they, I mean, some people aren't so good at it. It's none of it, no behavior on its own is ever indicative of everything. But, do they return your calls on time? In
Do
a
they show
sports
up?
group,
Do they
do they
show up?
show up?
Do
Do
they show up?
they, well, one way metaphorically and actually, do they show up? Do they say what they do and do what they say? Um, integrity and character is a big thing, and integrity in terms of the way I outlined it in the book is certainly there's a pejorative idea or a kind of a judgmental idea of what integrity is, which is around honesty and doing all that. But actually, integrity, if you look at it on one way, is my values and my actions are aligned. Well, my words and my actions are aligned. My values, my words, and my actions are aligned. I am an integrated being. I have a oneness to me. And with that comes a lot of authenticity, comes a lot of presence. You are what you say you are. There isn't a side to you. Now, you don't need to be politically naive either. You don't have to blurt it all out, but you kind of want to have that strong center. And I think again that comes from that self-knowledge we were talking about, that sense of the explored life. And I talk about the idea of kind of lead from within. That unless you've really understood what it is you stand for, where you're going, and why it matters, the sort of holy trinity of culture, but I think also of character. What are my roots? What do I stand for? What won't I stand for? Where do I stand on this? Am I going to kind of blow in the wind and be opportunistic? Well, you want to be agile, but maybe not opportunistic, and I think that comes from taking a certain sort of point of view, and that comes from self-knowledge, and that leads to what others might call character, if you like. And it'll get you through the tough times. It'll align a group. So I think it's hugely powerful and important.
Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, my last book was called You Lead, and the sort of the subtext is you lead you. And once you know how to lead yourself, then the rest can follow much easier.
Sure. And you think about, the idea of self-regulation. Well, regulation means to rule. It's regal, kingly. It's about ruling our emotions. It's about leading ourselves first. You have to be able to lead yourself first. And particularly, one of the pieces of work I've done in my life is kind of talking down premiership managers from what they really want to say on a Monday morning. Because what they really want to do is rip their heads off their players for not following the game plan. But that's not going to set them up for the game on Wednesday. So they need to rule their emotion in one way or the other. We need to understand ourselves, be able to process for ourselves in order to, the Viktor Frankl thing, that gap between stimulus and response, that's our power. And if the stimulus just makes us react, which never tends to go very well, we defend or we deny or we denigrate or whatever D word is of the time. Or do we respond in a way that is, as a leader, is our values what we stand for? The kind of ethos that we have. And can we, under pressure, respond rather than react? And I think that's a large part of character. Being able to respond, not react, to be able to not be thrown back on our kind of reptilian response, but be able to step into the kind of the being that we want to be in order to be a leader. And I think they're important questions and difficult questions. Personally difficult questions always. We all have these challenges. We're emotional beings and we're triggered easily. But character means being able to weather adversity, I think, in a way that aligns with who we want our best self to be, if you like.
Well, I certainly think we need to have more adversity brought back into education. want to finish
Yeah.
just because we haven't had much chance to talk about your book, which is just a delicious book to read. If anyone hasn't read it, my God, go and pick it up. Legacy: What the All Blacks Can Teach Us About the Business of Life. How did you come across this idea? I mean, everyone knows about the All Blacks, but the idea of writing this book, was it something personal? How did you get into it?
Well, I slightly stumbled into it. I did another book with a team called Mana, and Mana means kind of the spirit inside. And I worked with a photographer called Nick Danziger, and we managed to negotiate our way inside the All Blacks environment. I'd done a book many years before within the Australian Kangaroos, the rugby league team, with a similar kind of concept, and I was interested in doing that. And then, of course, I got to know the environment, and I got to know some of the people, and the leaders, and I kind of saw it coming together. The work I did in a more corporate space, with the work that they were doing in that space, and I realized, and I think it was also in my own life, I had reasonably recently become a father at that point. And so I was also, that idea of legacy, of course, talk about life events, and leadership and coaching, and character. And excuse me, all of those questions, really started to congeal, I guess, or come together, as an idea for a book. And I learned a lot from that experience, but I also learned that from that experience that a lot of what they knew, I knew in different domains. And what I became very interested in was, what are the transferable principles between domains? I don't believe that much about analogies, you know, that I love the book, it doesn't make the boat go faster, and I love that metaphor, but it doesn't always apply in groups. I mean, it doesn't. But I'm really interested in, you know, we all work in teams, as in groups, in one way or the other, either physical teams or virtual teams. And there's a line from Tolstoy, from Anna Karenina, the opening line, which I won't quote properly, but it's basically, all happy families are happy for the same reason, and all unhappy families are unhappy for their own reason. And I think that's the same with teams, you know, with groups, with all sorts of teams. There's plenty of ways to be unhappy as a team, to be dysfunctional. But really, the principles behind great groups, high-performing groups, however you define high performance, those principles are relatively and roughly the same. And the value sets that come up across many different domains tend to be very, very similar. The expectations, the standards, the way of interacting tend to be very much the same. So I'm really interested in those transferable principles, and I think it became just an emerging idea that crystallized into the book Legacy.
Well, for as being a rugby player, I tend to think rugby is a tremendous learning space, and better, and I give a qualification, better than many other sports in terms of the types of education it brings to you. Last question for you, James, because time is what it is. This notion of personal versus professional. So in a sport, it's kind of obviously closer to personal, because you're sweating, you're getting naked in a shower with the boys, and you know, so there's this sort of, it's me in with warts and all visible, and I might have pain, it's visible pain, and I might break an arm, and that's, you know, it's a personal issue as opposed to some cognitive dissonance or something like that. Yet it seems that one of the biggest challenges, and maybe one of the reasons why so many of the leaders don't become great leaders, is because they don't know each other, don't know themselves, and aren't prepared to dip into the true personal self, which includes my warts, my badness, my perhaps evilness. And do you think that that is the case? And do you think that business should be more personal?
You know, on that kind of lead from within principle, hell yeah. You know, I think leadership, you know, one of the key factors of leadership is courage, and one of the most difficult things to do is to take a good hard look at yourself, of course, but discomfort equals growth. To grow, you need to be prepared to step into that gap between where you're at and where you want to be, and that's an uncomfortable place to be. And if you want to grow, now you don't have to, but if you want to grow in your life, and I think the purpose of, if you take the kind of humanistic idea that we are driven towards self-actualization, that really we are part of the happiest people are the people who are becoming what they become next, that life really is a process of growth and learning and becoming. Then there are going to be plateaus that are uncomfortable, and they're going to be, and there's a phrase I use, if you're not growing anywhere, you're not going anywhere. And it's, you look at it on the obvious kind of corporate sense, and you go, a Kodak, what's this digital business got to do with us? They didn't grow. They didn't grow conceptually, morally, ethically, what ethos like, in an ethos kind of way. And then, of course, they disintegrated relatively as a business. We're either changing forwards, or we're shriveling up and going backwards, really. I think as human beings, that's what life is. Life is growth until you stop growing and you start. And so, I think probably it's a personal question of, can you invest in yourself in a process as a leader, as a process of, are you prepared to go the places that are maybe difficult, maybe uncomfortable, maybe awkward, maybe shameful, in order to move up to that next level, whatever that next level might be for you. And I think they're important questions. I think they're important questions about life, life and leadership, professional and personal. What's the difference in many ways? Jung said, we only change the world by changing ourselves first. If you want to change your outer circumstances, you want to change your inner conditions. And that's got to be a dialogue with self, a Socratic dialogue with self, in order to ask those questions and shine light on places of yourself that you may not otherwise go. And I can't talk about it from a business leadership thing. I just think I don't think I need to talk about it as a business thing. I think it's the life unexamined is a life half lived. And I think that was as true 2,000 years ago, or as true today as it was 2,000 years ago. But it's not an easy road. The easy way is to say, I'm fine, thanks very much. I'm just going to keep on doing what I'm keeping on doing.
Well, that's easy until one day it breaks down.
Well, it's easy until the road runs out. It's easy until your partner leaves you, because you haven't really changed. You're still the same. You haven't changed at all. It's easy until the digital revolution comes along and sweeps your business out from under you. It's fine until your staff walk out en masse because you haven't really changed. It's fine until you get passed over for promotion because they think you peaked and plateaued. Or you suddenly go, I'm doing the same life as I did 10 years ago, and I'm bored and I'm restless and I don't know what to do with myself. If you're not growing anywhere, you're not going anywhere. And I think that's the challenge. But I think surely that's the joy. Surely that's the juice of life is, you mentioned it earlier, that until you're 40 or 50, you're just trying stuff out. What better way to stay young when you are 40 or 50 or 60 than to try shit out? Keep trying, keep experimenting. Don't be, look for your own self-actualization and write your own story out there in the world. And I think that individuation, another Jungian phrase, is so fundamental to a life well lived and a life that keeps you know, sort of shedding what isn't necessary anymore, cutting the branches back so that new blooms come, to use a cliche. It's got to be the way forward, doesn't it? And I think, I work with a lot of coaches, and you've obviously spoken to a lot of coaches. Coaches, it's really about character development and personal development. It's not skills development so much. It's who are you? What are you bringing? And these are really important questions, I think, of life and of leadership, of love, of culture, of organizational growth, of creating value, and wherever you're at, taking it to the next level. So perhaps in your question of that high performance question, isn't high performance about being able to kind of take it to the next level and the next level after that? There's a commitment in the All Blacks, to get better every day. High performing environments are at their heart learning environments. The commitment is to get better every day. How can I be better? There's a lot of there used to be certainly a lot of shame around the self-development space. But of course, every successful athlete, let's say, is committed to their self-development. That's what they do. The world's greatest athletes, most famous people, are absolutely committed to getting better every day. And I think we can hold ourselves back by thinking, oh, I'm fine, thanks, mate, I'm good.
Well, we're going to finish there. I just wanted to give two comments. First is this notion of individuation, but let's stop at hyper individualization, because I think there's a whole lot of people going overboard on how important I am. It's all about me.
It's a different concept, right? It's a different concept.
Of course.
Individualization is, pick me, look at me, selfie stick. But individuation is, I think there's a Robert Louis Stevenson quote, it's becoming what you're capable of becoming.
Of course.
I think each of us are becoming you.
Yeah. I just wanted to, put that, just remind people that we're not talking about you, the individual, the star. And the second comment was this notion you mentioned, doing good, and how doing good is good for business. And my friend Giles Gibbons, that's his tagline for his company, called Good Business. But I've tended to back away from doing good to doing better. And you just mentioned it now. Like the All Blacks do it a little bit, be a little bit better every day. The idea of doing better seems less political, because doing good is necessarily some kind of political statement. I'm doing good for the world. I'm doing good for my society or my community, and it's not always good for everybody.
Well, I think that's fair. And I think it's I think doing better is it's also, it's more incremental, it's more achievable. You can just do a little bit better every day. There's an exponential value. That cumulative character comes from that, I think. I mean, I think probably the benefit of kind of, doing good, if we put it in inverted commas for a moment, is trying to make a positive contribution somewhere, somehow. Now that, I think the best way to think about that, though, sometimes is that it's there's a great Pericles quote, which is our achievements aren't written on stone monuments, they're woven into the lives of others. And I've always loved that, from that idea of what maybe legacy really is. And a phrase I've written for the book I'm writing at the moment is, we kind of write our eulogy every day. When your eulogy gets written, they don't talk about your stone monuments very much. They might get a mention. Your CV doesn't come into it, right? But your character does. He or she was a kind man or woman. They helped me when I needed help. I always knew I could go to them if I had a problem. They made me feel good. Character stuff that's remembered, that's most important, and that probably has the most kind of that butterfly effect, ripple effect, in terms of the way that the impact we really have on the world. And So, it's not a bad way to think, well, how do I do better with what I've got, with the immediate? And that comes down usually to the relationships that we have. Trying to be a better human being. The All Blacks say better people make better All Blacks. But they make better squash players. They make better business leaders, team leaders, better friends, better partners, better lovers. That incremental do better rather than I'm going to do good. I get that. I think I agree with that.
Love that. James, on this, I mean, I frankly could have gone on for a couple more hours. Loved this conversation with you, James. We rolled into the military and education and business, and of course, my love for rugby. How can somebody follow your writings, James, contact you should they wish to hire you, get to speak or consult or coach, buy your book? What are the types of links I should?
Well, the book is called Legacy. I can be found with a pretty swift Google, I think, I hope. LinkedIn tends to be a conduit. I've got a book coming out, I think probably early 2025, depending on how my efforts over the next few months, called Ethos.
Character.
And character. The character of character and growth, really, the book is about.
Well, I
And
suspect
character.
if you'll accept, I will grab you for another discussion when Ethos comes
I
out.
would enjoy that. I've enjoyed this conversation. I'd enjoy another one when the time's right.
Splendid. Many thanks, James.
Many thanks. Thank you very much for the conversation, for the dialogue.